In this series, we're doing a deep dive of the 5 fundamentals of pistol marksmanship. We've already covered stance as the predecessor to establish the foundation for the 5 fundamentals, and we've covered grip. Now let's dive into the nuances of aiming. There are 2 components to the fundamental of aiming, that is sight alignment and sight picture. Before we dive into that, however, there's 4 topics I want to cover that will set the stage for a deeper understanding on how to apply those. Those 4 precursor topics I want to cover are focal length, what we're looking at, the intensity of that gaze, and when we shift that, the sympathetic nervous system response and how stress affects our vision, eye dominance and when it matters, and then some tips on keeping both eyes open while we're shooting a handgun, because some people will see some visual anomalies such as double vision when they're forcing both eyes open. Now, the first key concept we want to discuss is focal length, or at what distance are we going to focus our eyes on. I like to use the analogy of a camera lens. Similar to a camera, the human eye can only focus on one distance at a time. So when we're shooting with a handgun with iron sights, we have 3 different things that we need to bring into focus. We have the target, we have the front sight, and we have the rear sight. I will challenge you to always start with a hard target focus. We want to be focused at the focal length or the distance of the target, and this is for a few reasons. Whether you're shooting in competition or for self-defense, there's going to be some type of visual stimuli typically that informs your decision whether you're going to shoot at this target or not. Think of it as threat PID or positive identification. Is this a shoot or a no-shoot type target? Once we've made that decision to shoot, then I want you to take your focus from being the general target to something very specific on that target's anatomy, whether that is the X-ring that you're shooting at or something physically on a 3-dimensional target. We've all heard the phrase aim small to miss small. In practical application, when you have a very finite point of aim, we tend to correlate that with much tighter shot groups on our target. So we'll begin with a hard target focus, and then once we've made that decision that we must shoot and it must be immediate, we're going to hyper eagle eye focus on something on that target's anatomy, and then as we push the gun up into our field of vision, we're pushing the gun sights as level as we can keep them directly into what we're looking at. As soon as you pick up that front sight post, then the challenge is to shift from a hard focus on the target to now we have a hard focus on the front sight. We call that a hard front sight focus. Now, under great stress, the sympathetic nervous system will kick in, and there's a good chance that you're going to have difficulty with transitioning from a hard focus on the target to then transitioning to your front sights. Many people will report in debriefs that they did not even see their sights during a self-defense encounter. Now, please don't misunderstand me. In a self-defense use of a handgun, I still want you to pick up your front sight. All I'm merely suggesting here is that because of the way we are hardwired as part of God's animal kingdom, we may not physically be able to transition the focus of our eyes from the focal length of the target to the front sight post. The goal in training is that we always shift from the hard target focus to a hard front sight focus, because that's what builds the proprioception in kinesthetics. Kinesthetics being the fancy way of saying that muscle memory that we're building, the neural pathways that go from the brain to the muscle groups and all that is what's naturally going to point the gun the same way every single time. When you're using the sights, what we're doing now is we're laying that foundation so that if your brain doesn't shift gears and you don't pick up your front sight, you are still pointing the gun directly at what you're looking at. When we're developing our technique for presenting the gun to the target, we've already established that I want you to hyper-focus at a finite point on the target, and then I want you to present the gun as level as possible, bringing the sights up into your field of vision. Once you have picked up the front sight in your field of vision, then I want you to be hyper-focused here at the front sight, and then it stays there until the gun comes out of your field of vision. Now, that's how we do it with iron sights. The flat or level presentation straight into our point of aim, our desired point of impact, that does not change if we're using a red dot on a handgun. If we are using a red dot on a handgun, it is still the same level presentation into what we're looking at. What does change, however, with a red dot sight is we maintain that hard target focus. We do not use the red dot as if it was a front sight. So again, I'm looking at that finite point on my target. I'm pressing smoothly and flat out. I'm still looking through the window, or more correctly, my right eye is looking through the window. My left eye is looking past the window at that finite point of aim on the target. I am not shifting focus to the red dot. The red dot just naturally appears right on top of what I am looking at. We should not have to search for the red dot. If you're searching for your front sight or you're searching for your red dot, then work on smoothing out that presentation so you're pushing directly into what you're looking at. For anybody who is trying to refine their technique or develop and build a technique, consider that this is my line of sight. This is what my eyes are looking at. The higher up and the more level that the gun sights are, the less travel there is, and it can smoothly just push naturally into straight what I'm looking at. So I think that is enough for you to understand the concept of focal length and how it applies to shooting a handgun. We start with that hard target focus. We transition to the hard front sight focus if we're using iron sights. If we're using a red dot, we maintain that hard target focus and we just bring the dot straight into what we're looking at. We've also talked about a technique or a method for smoothing out your presentation so that when you're looking at that finite point on your target's anatomy, you're bringing the gun sights, whether it's iron sights or a dot, straight into what you're looking at. Now let's quickly discuss the concept of keeping both eyes open when we're shooting a handgun. The main reason you'll hear for keeping both eyes open when shooting a handgun is because it allows in more visual stimuli to make those quality decisions leading up to us taking that shot. Also understand there's limitations to this because once that sympathetic nervous system kicks in, one of the prevailing responses there is tunnel vision. That's a physiological event that happens when the muscles of the eye constrict and you get hyper-focused on a certain thing in your environment, probably that saber-toothed tiger that's about to pounce on you. Another key reason we want to keep both eyes open in addition to situational awareness and quality decision making is visual input is part of how the brain determines balance. We have three main ways that the brain establishes if you're balanced or not. Does the horizontal line look level? Is the fluid in the inner ear level? And then how does the musculoskeletal system align with itself? Those are the three core components of balance. And as we established in the lesson previously on stance, we need to have a good balanced shooting position regardless of how we're engaging the target. Now, one of the challenges of keeping both eyes open while shooting a handgun with iron sights is that when we shift our focal length from that of the target to up close to where the front sight post is, some people will experience double vision. They will see two targets. The question comes up, which one do I aim at? You're going to aim at the one that your dominant eye is naturally aligning the sights up against. If this is challenging, then squint your non-dominant eye just to the point to where there's no longer double vision, and then use that point of aim. That's the target you're aiming at. When we squint that non-dominant eye, it will allow the dominant eye to take over. It will meld the two images into one, and eventually you will forget to squint. This is the only time when shooting a handgun that I really worry about eye dominance. Now, in some programs of instruction, it will be a requirement to identify which is your dominant or non-dominant eye. In the end, I don't worry about that too much unless the student is having double vision when focusing on the front sight. To identify which is our dominant eye, there's a couple different techniques. The simplest one that I have found that works for most people in the shortest amount of time is with both eyes open, fixate at a distant object, something very small. You can think of it as a light switch or something like that. have the student extend their arm, lock out the elbow, and we're going to put the thumbnail directly on top of whatever it is we're looking at. They should experience a visual illusion where it looks like they have X-ray vision. They're seeing the thumbnail, but they're also seeing that distant object through the thumbnail. Once the student has acknowledged that they are seeing that visual illusion of that X-ray vision looking through the thumbnail, then I will have them close one eye. Not moving the hand or the thumb, just closing one eye. Does the thumb appear to move, or is the thumb now opaque and covering up that object? If they say that the thumb is covering up the object, then the eye that they are looking through, the open eye, is their dominant eye. If they report that the thumb seems to have jumped a few inches off to the side and they can still see the object, have them open both eyes again. Once they acknowledge that they're having that X-ray vision, have them close the other eye. For most people, they're going to have the same eye dominance as their hand dominance. It's been found that about 20 or 30% of the population is cross-dominant. If they're right hand dominant, it's their left eye that actually is more dominant than their right. If you find that you are cross-dominant, then I don't want you to get wrapped around the axle. Your brain will naturally align the sights with whichever is your dominant eye. If we are cross-dominant, I do not want you to lean your head to the side to put it behind the sights, because that will put both your visual input as well as the fluid in your inner ear off kilter, and we've already had that discussion previously about balance. For example, if I have a good balanced stance and I'm just pushing the gun straight in front of my dominant eye, if I am left eye dominant, you'll notice that the gun is just naturally coming a little bit to the left of center line of the body. We've already discussed on getting that natural point of aim in the previous lesson. Once we have that natural point of aim established, then that body positioning will rectify which eye the gun naturally goes to. And again, if we're using a red dot on a handgun, then the double vision really doesn't occur because we're not focusing at the front sight. We're not looking at the red dot. We're hyper-focused still at the target. That's the focal length we're hyper-focused on, and then that red dot just naturally appears right on top of what we're looking at. Now, the last thing we'll consider before jumping into the two subcomponents of aiming, of being sight alignment and sight picture, is going to be a quick discussion on the importance of sight radius. Sight radius is basically how we describe the distance between the front and rear sights on your handgun. The shorter the sight radius, especially say on a subcompact gun, the shorter the sight radius or the distance between the front and rear sights are, the less forgiving any slight misalignment of the sights will be. This is why subcompact handguns, generally speaking, are a little bit more difficult for a new shooter to master. The larger the gun or the longer the sight radius, the more forgiving any of those little sight misalignments will be. So that is a segue into us now talking about the two main components of aiming. We'll start with sight alignment. Sight alignment basically describes how we are aligning or orienting the front sight in the rear sight notch. There's an adage known as equal height and equal light. That's a way of describing that when we are lining up the front sight post in the rear sight notch, that we want to have the top of the front sight blade level with the rear sights, and we also want to have the front sight blade centered left and right or horizontally within that notch. So we're focusing on that front sight. It should be nice and crisp, as we've already discussed. We're hyper-focused at the focal length of the front sight. Our rear sight will be just a little bit fuzzy, and we want to make sure that the front sight post is centered up, down, left, and right within that rear sight notch. Any errors with your front sight alignment will coincide with the point of impact of your round, meaning that if the front sight is just a little bit elevated, a little bit too high within that rear sight notch, then your round is going to impact a little bit high. Conversely, if the front sight is dipped a little bit too low in the rear sight notch, then the round will impact a little bit low. If it is low and left, then your round will impact low and left. Also understand that these errors are going to magnify over distance. If the angular deviation stays constant, if you're grouping, say, just an inch to the left at 3 yards, then when you go to 7 yards, now you've a little bit more than doubled the distance, you're likely going to be grouping about 2 inches to the left. If you double that again, and now we're shooting at 15 yards, we're likely going to be hitting about 4 inches to the left. So understand that any misalignment with our sights will compound with distance. Now, the converse of this is also true. The closer we are to the target, the more forgiving or the less that deviation is going to be on your target. So later on, when we're discussing more defensive type skills, we'll introduce the concept of a flash sight picture, because at a certain distance, it really is immaterial. As long as you have your front sight on the target, you will hit within an acceptable margin of error for that type of accuracy. Most defensive handguns these days come equipped from the factory with dots on the sight. You have a single dot on the front sight and then a dot on each side of the rear sight. These are particularly helpful if they have a tritium insert, meaning they'll glow in the dark, so that you can still align the sights properly even when you don't have enough ambient light to be able to pick up clearly your front and rear sights. Now, you still have the challenge of positively IDing your target before you engage it, but that is a separate issue. You will still be able to line those sights up if you have to, even in pitch darkness. So that is sight alignment. Now let's pivot into the second component of aiming, of sight picture. Once we have our sights aligned properly, so that they're equal height, equal light, or whatever adage you're going to use, sight picture refers to how are we going to place those aligned sights onto the target so that we hit our desired point of aim. Depending on what type of shooting you're doing, there are different types of holds you can use, but predominantly what is used is the center hold. Simply stated, you're going to focus on the center of your target, and you're going to put your front sight blade level into the center of your bullseye, your X-ring, whatever it is that is the center of your target. That's where you're going to put the top of your front side blade at. Now, it's key to also discuss that from the factory, most handguns are designed to be shot at 25 yards, meaning that the sights, when properly aligned, will match the trajectory of the round at 25 yards. When we're shooting at up close distances, say between 3 and 10 or 15 yards, it is helpful if you have dots on your sights to, instead of putting your front sight blade at that center hold, you're going to use the dot of your front sight, and you're going to place your front sight dot directly on top of your desired point of impact. So by placing the front sight dot on your desired point of impact, what you're doing is accommodating for the rising branch of the trajectory of the bullet. So with that rising branch of the trajectory, basically what you need to understand is that if you are aligning the sights and using the top of your front sight and putting a center hold directly what you want to hit, and you're, say, at 3 or 5 yards, and you're grouping tightly but a little bit low, it's probably not you. It's just the trajectory of the round has not reached and crossed the line of sight of what you're actually aiming at. So if you use the front sight dot and put that right on top of your desired point of impact when we're shooting at extreme close distances of, say, 3, 5, 7 yards, that will help to offset that trajectory a little bit and get you closer to what you're actually aiming at. So those enabling concepts we talked about in the beginning are what allows us to establish the good fundamentals of aiming, the two components being sight alignment and sight picture. It should become very intuitive, and in short order, you shouldn't have to be applying much conscious thought to aligning the sights and where you put those sights on your target to achieve that desired point of aim, especially for shooting up close and personal. The challenge comes in maintaining that proper sight alignment and sight picture as we are solidly applying the remaining of the 4 fundamentals. We don't want to deviate that sight alignment as the shot breaks. If you have any lingering questions on the fundamental of aiming or any of the topics that were covered in this video, then make sure you throw that into the discussion. If you're finding this educational series helpful, it would be helpful to me if you make sure you are subscribed and share this video with others in your peer group. Help spread the word. Next up, we'll talk about the fundamental of breath control, when it matters and when it does not. So check that out over here. If you don't have time for that, well then as always, God bless you and stay safe.